All right, folks. Well, it's 6:30. We're going to go ahead and get started, so we've got plenty of time for everyone. Good evening, and thank you all so much for joining us at this author talk and panel discussion. My name is Brad Allen. I'm the director here at Lawrence Public Library. We have been overwhelmed by the response to this program. It's clear that there's a topic of interest in Lawrence, and we acknowledge it's a sensitive topic. Addiction is complex, and it affects individuals from all walks of life. We ask that you keep tonight's discussion respectful and approach it from a place of empathy, recognizing that a number of factors contribute to these situations. So our program this evening is going to be in two parts. The first will be 30 to 40 minutes. We'll have a conversation with Sam Quinones, the author of The Least of Us, True Tales of America and Hope in the Time of Fentanyl and Meth. Then the conversation will shift to a local context with a panel of Lawrence-based addiction and recovery experts. There will be an opportunity for audience to ask questions. As you came in, you were given index cards. The blue ones are for Mr. Quinones' conversation, and the white ones are for the panel discussion. So please write your questions out, and we will collect those a little bit later. I also want to thank our community partners for tonight's program. To Lawrence Cares for providing a grant to purchase the books that we've made available, about 40 copies throughout the community. Really grateful to be able to share this book more widely with folks. If you haven't read it, it's a truly impressive, incredible book with lots of information that was very new to me. Our panelists from Burton Ash Community Health Mental Center, DECA, the Department of Pharmacology and Toxicology, Douglas County Sheriff's Office, Avalon Wellness and Recovery Center. Sorry if this is awkward. I'm not used to standing at a podium that is turned the other way. I'm not sure. I'm totally ignoring you all. Okay, sorry. I had to go off script there for a minute. To our friends at Heartland Community Health Center and Burton Ash for offering information about their services. They're back here in the back. Hello. So be sure to stop by their tables this evening. Okay, so I am pleased to welcome tonight's moderator, Bruce Leese. Bruce is a professor of family medicine, community health, and psychiatry at KU Medical Center, as well as the clinical director of KU's Coffrin-Logan Center of Addiction Research and Treatment. He is founder and facilitator of free smart recovery groups that have been meeting at Lawrence Public Library for over 5 years. Smart recovery groups support individuals who struggle with addictive behaviors, including substance abuse and gambling disorders. He is also co-author of 3 textbooks on addictions, including his most recent, Cognitive Behavioral Therapy of Addictive Disorders, which you can find in our adult nonfiction collection. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Bruce Leese. This is to clap.
Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be here. Hello, Sam. Can you hear me? Excellent.
I can, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes. Are we on a first-name basis, Bruce and Sam?
That's
right.
fine with me, yeah, sure.
Again, a pleasure to meet you. And we have a big turnout here, so we are grateful to you for being here. Let me introduce you.
My pleasure.
Sam is a journalist, storyteller, former LA Times reporter, and author of 4 acclaimed books of narrative fiction, including the New York Times bestseller and National Book Critics Circle Award winner, Dreamland, A True Tale of America's Opiate Epidemic. His 2021 book is the book that we're going to be talking about tonight. It's entitled The Least of Us, True Tales of America and Hope in Time of Fentanyl and Meth. It is a searing follow-up that explores the terrifying next stages of the opioid epidemic and weaves an analysis of the drug trade into stories of community. So, please help me welcome Sam Quinones.
There you go. Thank you very much. By the way, one thing, these are 4 books of narrative nonfiction.
Oh, did I say
fiction?
fiction? Just
Yeah,
3
that's okay.
letters. Oh, it's 3 letters.
Yeah, it's nonfiction. It's
Nonfiction.
true.
Thank you very much.
No problem.
Sam, I would love to open up by just having you share whatever first comes to mind about the book, about yourself, about whatever you think would be most interesting and relevant.
Well, let's see. My dad taught at University of Kansas for a couple of years. His wife, Roberta Johnson, was a very long-time professor in the Spanish department. My father died about 5 years ago. Roberta is still living in Los Angeles. But anyway, that's my connection to the University to Lawrence, Kansas. I'm a reporter, a long time. I've been a journalist, a crime reporter, really, most of my career. And I lived in Mexico for 10 years and got into this book really through the other one, the one you mentioned earlier, Dreamland, which started as really my attempt to just write about why Mexican heroin traffickers were having such a big business, why they were seeing we were seeing so much more heroin smuggled into the United States. And that became, from that I realized that was on that book is really about a small town in Mexico where everybody comes to the United States to sell heroin retail, like a pizza delivery system, except for heroin. And I got into that story and then realized that the reason that they had such a big demand for their product was because of a much larger supply story, which was the opioid revolution in American pain management, in American medicine. And I knew nothing about that because I'd lived in Mexico. I didn't know what an OxyContin was when I started this whole project. It was like 12, 14 years ago now. It seems like forever. But because I was living in Mexico, I didn't really pay any attention to anything that wasn't about Mexico at the time. And I came back in 2004, worked for the LA Times, and got onto this story about Mexican heroin traffickers. And that led me to the much larger story, again, which was this massive supply of pills unleashed on the country by drug companies promoting the idea that there was no addictive risk to the pain pills, that they were pushing doctors to prescribe for almost like anything. And along the way, I published that book in 2015, was stunned at the response because really I found nobody was interested in, if you weren't in medicine or social work or narcotics enforcement, you didn't really want to, beyond that, nobody wanted to talk about this. A lot of families were very, very shaken and embarrassed that their people were strung out and all this kind of stuff. And so I thought the book would just completely fail. And instead, what ended up happening, I think the book really helped awaken awareness of this whole problem coast to coast. And I was a barometer of that. I began to get all kinds of invitations to come speak. I think I did, like in the next 4 years, or 5 years, almost 5 years, I did 265 speeches, just a ridiculous number of speeches. But, I'd written 2 books about Mexico. And I believe they are fantastic, beautiful, wonderful books of journalism, and nobody read them. And so, Dreamland comes out, I'm thinking nothing's going to happen with this book. And all of a sudden, people want to talk and want to invite me out. And of course, after writing 2 books and no one want to read, now people want to read this book, want me to come. And I'm like, hell yeah, I'm coming. So I never stopped getting out there. And then along the way, though, as I was doing that, 2015, 16, 17, 18, 19, up until the COVID hit, I was watching as the story changed under my feet, and it no longer was doctors prescribing legitimate prescription narcotics. It was the Mexican trafficking world supplanting that supply source and covering the country in this new era of synthetic drug era that we're now in. Fully, largely because of changes down in Mexico, having nothing to do with, in my opinion, with so much demand up here. It has more to do with the idea that traffickers down there figured out it was much better for them, more profitable, less risky, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Many reasons why to make their own drugs rather than grow them. And so you don't need land, sunlight, farmers, rain, you don't need anything. You just need constant shipments of chemical ingredients mostly from China. And that's what they get because they control the shipping ports. And so we began to see the spread of methamphetamine and fentanyl, one a stimulant, the other a depressant, but nevertheless together, or kind of almost together, and now certainly together, covering the country the same way the pills did. just from Maine to LA. I mean, it's just incredible quantities. And along the way, everything changed. Everything about drug. When it comes to places like Kansas, one of the major changes was you don't have any more meth books. Nobody has any more meth. There are no more meth books in America. They've been outcompeted, beaten out by the Mexican traffickers down in there, down in Sinaloa, Durango, Michoacan, Nayarit, various places like that, up into Tijuana as well, places like that too, where they can get chemicals cheaper and more plentifully forever, and that's what's going on. So now we have two drugs, a stimulant and a depressant, covering the country. That has never happened before in the history of our country. In fact, historians will always tell you that drug use in America, it obeyed cycles. So first stimulants, then depressants, then stimulants, every cycle like 10 or 15 years, maybe, something like that. And now the vast, vast supplies, unrelenting supplies out of Mexico just do away with history in a sense. There's a whole lot of other things that both of these drugs change we could talk about, but that's kind of how I came to this other book. The latest book, The Least of Us, was to watch it as I was speaking all over the country in many, many, many states, 30 plus states I'm sure I visited. And I watched this take place, and that became the book that you all very graciously read, and I thank you very much for doing that.
Thank you for that that background. Sam, explain the title of the book, The Least of Us, True Tales of America and Hope in Time of Fentanyl and Meth.
Well, when I was writing Dreamland, again, a lot of this is connected. These are two separate stories, but of course, there's a lot of connections between them. When I was writing Dreamland, I began to realize or believe, became convinced that there are many deep-seated roots for this problem of the opioid epidemic. One was our destruction of community, which we had been studiously endeavored to do since at least the Reagan years. Destroying things that brought us together, not investing in things that brought us together, not worrying about whether we should be, together as Americans, this kind of thing, and on and on and on. And along the way, though, I also came to believe that part of it too was that we wanted some big magic answer to all our problems. So what was the problem here? Pain, human pain, very, very complicated, very difficult to deal with. What is the magic answer? One kind of pill for every single human being. Something connected to the, pain is connected, of course, to the brain, central nervous system. Enormously complex organ, and we were going to treat it with one pill for every single human being, regardless of the background, blah, blah, blah. And I began to think, we have gotten away from values that I believe made this country strong, make any community strong, which is a focus on small stuff. Doing things in small and not worrying if you're saving the world, but simply worrying about trying to make your community, your street, your church, your swimming pool, or whatever, school, a little bit better, and not worrying that it may not be saving the entire world, right? And so to me, that was a really important idea, I thought. And that as a culture, we had not been able to get away from. We had become so intoxicated by big answers to things, big answers to questions, And then so along the way, I did not have I'm not a Christian, but I began reading the Bible during this book, and the reason was my publishers were very eager for me to start writing a second book after Dreamland had done so well. And so they said, don't worry about writing a book outline. And that's a really bad idea. You need a book outline. Writers need book outlines and kind of a roadmap, even if you don't stick to it really closely, right? But then, so I didn't have one. So I needed to read widely and find a, and I read the Gospels of Jesus, the life of Jesus, and I came upon, the book of Matthew, that which you do unto the least of these, my brother, do unto me. And it hit me very powerfully that this was connected to the story that I was telling. in several ways. One was, we cannot survive as a community if we're not looking out for the least of us, the people that neuroscience was showing us. We were all the least of us resides within us all, meaning we all can be that addict eating from the trash. We all have the neuroscience, the neuroscientific structures and brain chemistry, to be addicted to something. And with our economy today, which we can talk more about later, we have just a hyper addictive economy of legal stuff, mostly legal stuff. Chicken nuggets, coffee, smartphones, video games, on and on and on. And it just made me feel like this idea of focusing on the least was applicable for various parts of this book. One was, of course, paying attention to the people who were most in need, and communities that were most in need too. And not just addicts, but people who communities that have lost a lot in, Rust Belt, inner city neighborhoods, whatever, on and on and on like that. And then at the same time, I also felt it was applicable because what it really was talking about was the least effort is actually the most important one. It's the idea of trying to help create or repair or rebuild community, small step by small step, the same way an addict in recovery does addiction recovery, one day at a time, small steps. I'm in New Orleans right now. I was speaking for my next book. I was speaking with a guy who told me that that's the very nature of his own recovery. It's just like, I'm moving along step by step. He's been doing it step by step for 10 years. He's quite a bit. He's recreated his life, and a family and all that kind of stuff. And so that idea kind of hit me at a time when I was ready to hear it in various ways, and it seemed to be appropriate to the topic as I was dealing with that topic. So that's kind of where the title comes from.
Thank you. I do want to make sure everyone knows that we can take questions up here. Kathleen, do we have, if you have questions, we have little index cards, and if you want an index card, raise your hand, and we'll give you one, and you can write a question on it. And if you have any, I'd be happy to take them now. Sam, I'm really curious about how you got to so many places, so many communities, so many stories. Can you talk a little bit about your trek through the communities and literally countries?
Sure. I would say that in part it was a little bit of reflection of I didn't have an outline. I was like, oh my God, I signed up for this book, and my editors were right to insist it was the book to write. I had another idea, completely different, which is going to be a great book someday, but it was not the right moment. And so my approach to journalism is immersion always, and constantly talking to people, constantly talking to new people, re-interviewing people I've already spoken to. And little by little, I began to develop an outline of how the story of the book might work. And that a lot changed along the way. I began to realize that methamphetamine was coming in such ghastly, potent quantities that it was creating mental illness and a major driver of homelessness and mental illness in the country. I didn't start out that way. It just comes as it goes. And so then, you need to find out stories and then that illustrate that. And one story that I'd started with was the story of Clarksburg, West Virginia, and Doc O, who had a great story himself as a purveyor of pills, and then got his license revoked and went through his own recovery, very public recovery in this one little town, very small town. As I was doing that story, I began to realize that they were being inundated with this methamphetamine, and for the first time ever, this tiny little town, which has no affordable housing problem whatsoever, it's a Rust Belt town, for goodness sake, all of a sudden had hundreds of homeless people out of their minds, stripping the copper wire from the houses and all this kind of stuff. And so, journalism to me is just you constantly talk to new people, and then you go back and you re-interview the people you have. And so little by little, it just came I came upon people with stories that I thought illustrated points that would be great parts of the book. Rashad Martin, who's still doing time in Ohio, the first black dealer of methamphetamine in Columbus, Ohio. And I wanted to write about it because the supplies of meth and fentanyl too are so huge that one of the things that's changing is that black people are now using and selling methamphetamine, which in my career, I'd never, ever seen that. Never once had I ever seen a black person even know what methamphetamine was. In the drug using communities of the black America, it's cocaine, not methamphetamine. So all of a sudden, he was willing to talk with me. I went to visit him in prison. And I'm very much interested in explaining to people how drugs arrive in their neighborhoods or how drugs arrive in their towns. And so Rashad's story was a good one. The story about the guys in Louisville who connect up in prison and then all of a sudden flood the Louisville area with methamphetamine. You know, it's like you keep on doing this and all of a sudden, and always you keep on refining your questions and refining where you're headed with it, you know, and how, you know, part of the story was how does fentanyl change everything? How does methamphetamine, what is the mental health effect of methamphetamine? And then at the same time, that's not even half the book really. The other half of the book was a continuation of Dreamland, which was, I wanted to tell stories of Americans involved in the smallest ways possible, the least way possible, in rebuilding or protecting or strengthening their communities, no matter how small. In fact, the smaller, the better. So I come across the story of Bird in Muncie, Indiana. Now that story, I didn't realize that story until I'd been in Muncie about 3-4 days. I really came to write about the baseball field that they were putting in the place of what had been the parking lot for the enormous transmission factory that Chevrolet owned there, now long gone and cracked and weeds growing in, and they put this beautiful little emerald baseball diamond there. And I wanted to talk about how you start small, and then as time goes on, boom, you can build on that. The small steps lead somewhere. And I thought it was a beautiful story. And then along the way, I discovered the story of Bird, who saves his community in a very strange way by opening this community center with the key that the city doesn't know he kept. Because he used to work at this community center that they were now closing years ago because they didn't have the budget and the Rust Belt phenomenon and all that stuff. And the story of Bird, just, I'm very, very, very interested in letting all my preconceived notions pass. When I hear a great story, something that I want to go, oh, wow, that's unbelievable. And if I want to tell my wife starts crying or something like that, that's even better, you know? And so I was like, Bird's story was killer. Those of you who've read it, I hope, agree. Man, I mean, and I never knew him. He was dead. There's a picture of him in the community center. I talked to people who knew him, his ex-girlfriend, a friend, woman who worked at the community center, the guy who built the baseball diamond, all that kind of stuff. And so it became a story about the diamond at the end, about this beachhead idea. Like if you want to recover a community, you start small with a beachhead and then you move and you gain more territory. And that's what the guy's idea with building that baseball diamond. But then, of course, along the way, I could tell this unbelievable story. I just felt so honored or out of my league sometimes with having found the story, because I thought it was so beautiful and so stunning. And I was just like, thank God I'm a journalist. This is the greatest damn job anybody ever had. And so one of the things about my work too is I very, very commonly pivot quickly, right? I don't sit there going, well, I didn't think about writing Bird's story, so maybe I shouldn't. Hell with that. I'm like, no, it's hell. I heard that story, talked to a few folks, and it became even better than when I first heard it. And then I was like, forget it. I'm changing this whole story up, and it's leading with Bird. And I kind of, same with Angie Odom and Starla and Bella. I did not know that story really fully until and then finally meeting Angie Odom. We had a 2-hour conversation. She's the only person I know who talks more than I do. Okay, and beautiful, wonderful woman, very devout Christian, beautifully devout Christian in my opinion. So we get to end of 2 hours. I turn off my little tape recorder on my phone, and she keeps talking. And it's during that period she tells me the story of being tied to the back of the boat that I lead the whole book with, tied to the back of the boat in the Navy, out in the Pacific Ocean, coming to the Navy angry and bitter, having been raped by a relative and all. Mother didn't really pay much attention to her when this happened. Felt wanting God to vindicate her anger. And there on the back of the boat and under the heavens, complete darkness, every star in the sky, in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, she comes to God and she says, tell me I'm right. And God melts her bitterness, melts her anger, replaces it with love and patience. And I sat there open. I'm not a Christian, but I do believe, and I think this is a big mistake on the part of a lot of journalists today to not do this. I really believe in writing about people with whom I have almost nothing in common, with respect and honor. And I stood there thinking, oh my God, this is another staggering story. I couldn't, and then the whole story of Angie and Starla and on. I tell in now 6 or 7 parts in the book. All of that kind of became then this way of leading each section. And then of course the last chapter is when Starla dies and Bella, Angie is so upset, so afraid that Bella will be upset at her birth mother for being a prostitute, for being a drug addict, all this kind of stuff. And now Bella has to deal with some of that in her own body and that kind of thing. And instead, Bella, this wonderkin of a child, calls and talks with the baker and has the baker make a big cake. And the baker tells the baker the cake has to say these words, and she brings the cake to the birthday, and then the words on the cake, a pink cake with strawberries and everything, and the words on the cake are, I love you no matter what happened. Meaning, I don't care why you were, on the street and drug addicted and having sex with guys you didn't own. None of that matters. I just love you. And I was crying. My wife was just like bawling her eyes out, which is a very, very good thing. So anyway, this is way longer probably answer, but you get me going on these topics and I just love them. And so this is kind of the process I go through. I'm like wide open. I'm willing to pivot. I want to talk to people over and over and over and over. I interviewed Angie, I think 9 times, something like that. And so that's kind of how I do my work, because I feel that the longer you do that, the more you do that, the stories will come out. They will not come out after an hour interview. That's not enough time.
Sam, thank you so much. I have 3. By the way, I don't know if you can see, we have well over 100 people here.
I cannot see a thing, but thank you for telling me that.
Yeah,
I see this little speck of people there.
You're going to hear the wild applause at the end. It'll be deafening.
Oh, great! Yeah. Well, it's don't stop. That's great. Okay, wonderful.
So I have 3 index cards, and there's a theme to it. Rather than reading all 3, there you go. How's that? Can you see that? Our crowd.
I can, everyone's like a little dot. But yes, Thank you. I'm so glad. Right. So many people here. Thanks to Chuck for organizing all this, by the way, and the folks at the library. Really, really appreciate it.
Well, we still have a few more. We have a few more questions for you.
Fine. Fire away.
The 2 themes, one of them is the theme of attitudes about people with addictions. And I think it'd be really, really helpful. I can't imagine that any less than 3/4 of the people who are here because they care deeply about people who suffer from addictive disorders. And I think that the worst thing that happens to these people with addictions is stigma. because it gets in the way of.
Yeah.
It gets in the way of recovery. It gets in the way of services.
Sure.
So what can you tell us about attitudes towards people with addictions, how we can address the problem of stigma and what you've
I would say, I know this is going to betray my bias as a reporter, but the only way I think that human beings change their mind about a topic is through storytelling. It brings out empathy for others. I mean, it's just such the most powerful tool we have, and we have used it since the caveman days, right? I mean, storytelling has been part of who we are as a species. It's an essential part, and what the problem with addiction is it's always been hidden, and that's what I found when I wrote Dreamland. I found 5 families in the entire state of Ohio. Think about that. The entire state of Ohio wanted to speak about this on the record. 5. That's ridiculous. I mean, there's tens of thousands of these folks all across Ohio, and it's a massive, massive problem, as you probably know from seeing any of the statistics. So the only way to really break down stigma is to keep telling stories. I believe Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous. I understand the story, the background to it all, and the backdrop to it all. But I think they need to lose that second word. I think they need to be not anonymous. We need to be telling why? Because we all, as I said earlier, we all have this brain chemistry that can lead us to addiction. Every single human being has this. And so we all can be that addict eating from the trash. We can all be that person over there that we kind of have in the past avoided or disparaged or what have you. And I think only through telling stories, powerful, unvarnished, powerful, humane stories, do you get to change stigma. And frankly, it's going to sound horribly immodest, but and you didn't read this book, but the Dreamland book did that, I think. I mean, pardon my immodesty, but I lived it. Okay, I lived the time when I turned the book in, there were 3 lawsuits against drug companies. Right? Nobody knew how to pronounce naloxone. Nobody knew what an opioid was. Right? There was a deep. It wasn't so much even stigma, it's just chasmic, ignorance about addiction and what to do and all of this kind of stuff. And I think the book came out. It told stories with very powerful language and very concise human stories, putting faces to this. And this is what we need to do more and more and more and more is do that. And I think in the end, it radically changed. Within 3 years, there was hundreds of lawsuits against drug companies. Now, eventually leading to 3,000. I'm telling you, there were 3 when I turned the book in. Okay, and so I think all of that is a reflection of how storytelling changes minds. It's really long term. It's really the only. I don't want to say there may be other things I'm not thinking of, but honestly, I think that storytelling takes many forms. Could be hearing a story in the supermarket when you're talking to your friend. Could be in a house of worship. Could be at your PTA. Could be at the park. It could be on TV. It could be in a podcast. There's a million different ways stories can be told, but it's usually storytelling that will change how we feel about a certain topic. And I think this is clear throughout, particularly now in times of mass media and since World War II, let's say, or even before. Storytelling is how you do that. I think that Dreamland did that, frankly, very, very powerfully, and I hope the least of us will do something similar, we'll say.
So I am inferring from what you're saying that by storytelling, you are suggesting that we humanize rather than dehumanize.
Of course, that's what I think. That's what I tried to do with Dreamland. I think it's also what I tried to do with the Mexican guys too. I'm not so interested in I don't write with adjectives so much, or adverbs for that matter. I believe you need to really go very aggressively and through and cut out the adjectives and adverbs and let people figure out for themselves, readers figure out for themselves how they feel about this person. So I could write about, see, these guys who are selling this ghastly black tar heroin that was destroying lives and clogging veins and all that stuff. I could write with them with kind of the linguistic version of tut, 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 aren't these terrible human beings? Or I could tell the story, unvarnished, strong, concise language, not diluted, bloated language, and tell their story, and you could figure it out for yourself, you readers, I mean. And to me, that is absolutely what Dreamland was about. I hope that's also what the Least of Us is about as well. Not doing my very best as a journalist to accumulate, compile as much information about human being X, whoever that might be, as I possibly could within the realm of my own budget, my own time constraints, my own capabilities as a journalist, and continue to do that and continue until I have to finally turn the book in. And then that's the end of that story. You got to turn it in at some point. And so that's what I tried to do with Dreamland. I think my feeling is that the effect of that book, I watched it, as I said, when I turned the book in, I told my wife, no one's going to read this book. It's going to be 6 months, we're going to be on to another book, maybe if they'll even have, And, 8 years later, I mean, it was like we've gone through unbelievable changes in our house because of all of this interest. And we could see these groundswell all across the country, people coming out of the shadows into the light to tell their story of their uncle or their own personal story. All of this is so healthy. It's absolutely essential. That's why I say Narcotics Anonymous, lose the anonymous thing, man. Just get rid of it and start telling, I'm Jerry Smith and I'm a drug addict and this is the story I'm going to tell you, and boom. I understand why they do it. I'm not here to criticize them necessarily. What I'm trying to say is enough with the anonymity surrounding and the preciousness surrounding addiction. Just tell the story. Tell the story and have it do its work in changing a heart or a mind along the way.
I can certainly see how you are identified as a storyteller. You've told us some really interesting and important stories. We're getting close to the end of the time we have with you. So let me see if I can put together a few of the nuggets that you've given us. Clearly, you have learned that people with addictions are human beings that suffer, and to a large extent, they don't suffer by choice. They suffer as a result of forces that are inborn and natural in the way we're wired. They suffer because of market forces relating to illegal substances that are widely distributed. I think what you're saying is that if we told, instead of hiding in the closets, hiding our family members who have suffered with addictions, instead of people with addictions hiding their stories, if people came out and told their success stories and the humans told the human side of addiction, we would be a much more compassionate society, and maybe people would be more likely to even seek treatment, and we would think about addiction the way we do about cancer instead of the way we do about committing crimes. I think that's right. Consistent with what you're proposing. I am so disappointed that we can't stretch time. It's 10 after, and we thought we'd end somewhere between 5 and 10 after the hour. I thought I'd give you an opportunity to just a quick 60 to 120 second wrap up. I can't thank you enough. It's been so good to have you here. That
was my pleasure.
If you have any kind of final words? One of the questions was about what we can do in our community, and I think you've addressed it well just by talking about destigmatizing, coming out of the closet with addictions and not treating them as crime, but treating them compassionately and humanely. So maybe that's what we need to do more of in every community. So final thoughts before we thank you and say goodbye.
I would say this. I would say that all of that is true, and we also need to be forthright about the failings of people who get into this as well. It's not correct to say this is only a bunch of outside forces. This is about human beings, and we all screw up. I think all of this is part of the story. It has to be, and that's kind of what I tried to tell in all my stories, is not blink, not say, okay, well, I don't want to hurt his feelings. No, this is part of it, you know? And so I'd say a kind of a real unvarnished, clear-eyed look, which, as I tried to do in Dreamland, you know, which you all can read and then see whether I succeeded, is to try to get people to see that there's these major things that go into the death of one kid, of one family's child. That's kind of what I was trying to do. And so anyway, that's it. I'm very grateful to you all for reading The Least of Us. Thank you very, very much. It was a ton of work, and I love doing it. But I so appreciate people trying to reading it and coming together to talk about it and so on. You can reach me if you need to reach me. I'm very easy to find. samquinones.com. You can find my contact there, and I'm happy to be in touch with anybody who is interested in following up.
Thank you so much. Can we get the camera on the crowd so Sam can see the sugar as we thank him? Let's see if you can get to see us here. There we go. Let's see.
Oh, there you are.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness! Wow. Hey. Well, thanks
Can you
very
see
much,
the group?
folks, for using your Tuesday night. Is it Tuesday or is it Wednesday? I can't even remember. I'm on the road being a reporter, and I can't remember what it is. But thank you all very, very much. I so appreciate it.
Thank you for the important work you're doing, and I hope you continue. We'll look for your next book.
All right
also.
then.
Thank you.
See you. Bye.
All right. There we are, right there. In case you don't know what we look like, that's us. Why don't we have the panel come up here now, and we can turn off the cameras and stick to us. So I'm going to kick off the panel by introducing everybody who's up here, and they'll share a little bit about who they are and what brings them here today. We'll make sure we're in good shape technically up here. If you have, the three people who provided questions, I hope I did them justice. It was not easy. This is a man who is a delightful storyteller, which probably makes it a little bit less likely that we'll get through all of our questions. So why don't we get started? I will tell you who's who, and then they will tell you a little bit about themselves and what brings them here. Dr. Nana Dodson, you are first on my list, somebody who I have had the good pleasure of working with, and if you would introduce yourself and say what brings you here, that would be wonderful.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Nana Dodson. I'm the Chief Medical Officer at Burt Nash, where I've been for close to 8 years. I oversee medical services there, which includes our medication-assisted treatment program. As a provider, I'm able to see children all the way up to our elderly population. I'm very grateful to be part of this panel and grateful that you all were able to come.
Thank you very much. And Chrissy Mayer?
Hi, everyone. My name is Chrissy Mayer, and I'm the Chief Community-Based Services Officer at DECA. One of the reasons I'm here is we operate the state naloxone distribution program, so this means we provide free naloxone throughout the state of Kansas. We also provide free fentanyl test strips and free lock boxes and medication disposal bags as well. We do focus a lot on prevention and have some specific prevention activities here in Douglas County that I'll reference later. So thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. Zijun Wang, welcome. Is it Dr. Zijun Wang, since you're an assistant professor?
Yeah.
Dr. Wang.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Zijun Wang. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Kansas, and I work in the School of Pharmacy, Department of Pharmacology and Toxicology. In my lab, we use animal models to study the neurobiology under drug addiction. We're trying to understand what the drugs has changed the brain so that to leads on later addiction-related behaviors. And hopefully we can identify some novel target so that can reverse those things that the drugs has done to us, to the brain. So hopefully we can come up with some novel therapeutics. So that's what we do in our lab.
Thank you very much. And Lieutenant Mayor, I said it right, didn't I?
Yes, sir.
Thank
Yes, sir.
you.
My name's Mark Mayer. I'm with the Douglas County Sheriff's Office. I'm here in the capacity of your local friendly police officer. Also, I have a personal connection, and I don't mean to jump ahead if that's where we were going, sir, but my nephew was one of the numbers from the Ohio Valley that Dreamland was written about. He was an all-star, all-American tailback out of Dublin, Ohio, had a full ride scholarship to Kent State and died of an opiate overdose. So I've got a personal investment in the topic as well. I'm glad to be here, and I'm honored to be with such people at the table.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that personal story. And this is David Hawley, owner of the soon-to-be-opened Avalon Wellness and Recovery Center.
Evening, everybody. Yeah, David Hawley. As was just said, I'm getting ready to open up a new substance use disorder treatment facility. It's going to be a 60-bed facility over on Iowa. The reasons for doing something like this is from my own personal experience. I have 20 years in recovery. Spent a lot of time in the rooms, hearing people's stories, sharing my story, just trying to get people on the path of recovery. So now I hope to do that with this center. Been in Lawrence for 20 years, love this community. A lot of what was said by Sam tonight is talking about the community of recovery, and I've been saying that over and over again for the last year. I really think that, really ultimately it takes communities coming together, sharing these stories, and, doing, like you said, the little things, but just working together as a community to save lives. So I'm glad to be up here and with my community, and thank you guys for coming.
Thank you. All right. I've got the blue cards. So I may still use the questions from there, and looks like we'll have some more. Why don't we start? I would love to just ask the question of any of you, what is it like to have an addiction? What's that experience like? David, I will pick you first since you offered that you yourself, I think you said you're in recovery.
Yeah. So, to me, I was kind of talking earlier tonight about, what my bottom was, and I know Sam was kind of talking about the stories with, other addicts, and sometimes it's, this devastating thing that happens where somebody really has something terrible and traumatic that happens in their lives that motivates that whole thing. For me, I just kind of got to a point, I was putting it off day after day, and in his book, he talks about some of the neuroscience behind addiction, what we're doing with those pathways to set up to work against our best interest to keep taking something that's causing so much destruction and so much damage in our lives. And I had kind of fallen into that. And, for me, it was just, I had this desire and this ambition to escape it. I was tired of sacrificing everything for that one thing. And so I listened to somebody else's story. Somebody else in AA said something that was just struck a nerve with me, and from that point on, I felt like I could do it. That person gave me hope. He shared his story, it gave me hope, and then I was on my way. And then I did the same thing for other people. So, hope that covers it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Others? I have a question for, do you prefer Chrissy or Miss May?
Chrissy's great.
You work over at Decker. What's it like from your standpoint as you watch people in recovery? What's it like for people to recover from an addiction? And you're welcome to start with what it's like to have an addiction from what you've seen.
Sure. So I think one thing to keep in mind is addiction is a brain disease, and I think it's important for people to remember that it's not a moral failing, and I think that's where a lot of the stigma comes from. So just reminding us that chronic conditions do have relapse, and then you can recover again. So just being mindful of treating addiction as a disease versus a moral failing, I think, is a key piece. In my division, we really focus a lot on prevention of how do we stop people from using substances, how do we educate and promote, and also focus on raising awareness about the issues, because a lot of times, if we don't understand the issues, we can't support people who might be struggling with addiction. So really being mindful of how do we support and educate our community more broadly is what we really focus on from the prevention standpoint.
And Dr. Dotson, same question. What, from your standpoint as a physician, as a psychiatrist, what do you see from start to finish when somebody's at the stage where they're not ready for recovery, and then they are, and then they are somewhere in the neighborhood of, for some people, it's recovered, and for some people, there's no such thing as recovered. So anything about that experience? I ask you these questions because there are people, I'm sure, in the audience who haven't had exposure to people who suffer from addiction. And the more specific you can be, the better.
Let me first start by saying that my training was about 20-something years ago in Washington, D.C., at the George Washington University Hospital, where about 5 miles southeast of that neighborhood was one of the most impoverished areas of D.C., which is Anacostia. And those patients, the patients that I worked with the most, were from that area. So while I was training on the inpatient unit, I had firsthand experience and listening to stories, as Sam had mentioned, of people who were frustrated, felt lonely and isolated. They felt stigmatized, even as they received treatment. And had it not been for community mental health centers and community health centers that were close by, I doubt that they could have gotten the comprehensive care that they needed. These are the people that had the least. And I think, I credit those agencies for being as inclusive as they are and providing the comprehensive care that those folks needed. To answer your question, I believe the frustration and the hopelessness that comes as a result of continued relapse from addiction should not be taken lightly. And those are the times that those folks need as much support as possible. And unfortunately, sometimes that's when they lose it, because most of us don't have the understanding that's required. And so I also believe in the neurobiology of addiction and that it is an illness. And the closer we can come to matching it with diabetes or even hypertension, the better off we'll all be.
And the chronicity of those diseases is really relevant here, because people, most of the studies on the treatment of addiction are 15 sessions, or in some cases a year, but it's assumed then you're done, and that's not the case with any of the diseases you mentioned. Thank you for that. I have somebody who has an urgent question. They say, Bruce, please ask my question this time. I got a little stuck there. Sam likes to talk. Dr. Wang, the question is about the medications, and I think you're in a really good position to talk about medications like the partial agonists and naloxone and naltrexone and Vivitrol. And so, remembering that some people have never heard any of these names, anything you can do to educate us. And hopefully the person who says, Bruce, please, you won't be mad at me now that we got this question.
So first of all, unfortunately, we have many types of addiction, like methamphetamine, opioid addiction, cocaine addiction, cannabis addiction, but not all addiction have medication to assist with their recovery. Like methamphetamine and cocaine addiction, there's no FDA-approved drugs to help with the medication-assisted therapy. And then most of the drugs that we heard about, like buprenorphine, naloxone, naltrexone, or methadone, are for opioid addiction. And they are all different types of opioid receptor agonist, partial agonist, or antagonist. So what does that mean? That means those drugs act on the little receptors in the brain where opioid has been activated. So there are different receptors. Think about it as a lock in the brain, and then the opioid or some other substance are like the key. So when the key unlocks the lock, then it turns on all kinds of different signaling pathway in the brain, so that everything is different, everything changed. And the chemical that Sam has mentioned many times that everybody has, then that get people addicted to those drugs are called dopamine. I believe everyone heard about that. When opioid receptor is activated, somehow dopamine is released, and that's how addiction initially started. So after this repeated exposure to those opioids, then these receptors become desensitized, which means so many exposures, so many keys are opening, and then these locks sometimes becomes not useful, or they are malfunction, so that this kind of signaling pathway shows dysfunction. And now those drugs, either partial agonist or antagonist, work on these same locks, help us to treat with those symptoms that that opioid addiction patients have been experience with. And of course, why there is some drugs that is activating this lock, but some drugs is deactivating this lock, it always depends on what stage these patients are or what they need. If they are actively using, probably unlock or decrease or turn off the lock is not a good way, because they just stop using the drug, they are experiencing severe withdrawal symptoms, then we need to be careful to using those antagonists, which is they are already in shortage of the keys to turn on this lock. And then if you continue to close these locks, then it will put these patients in danger. And why opioids put people, opioid overdose is such a big thing is because opioid receptors is also presented in the respiratory system in the brain, the center. So that when the receptor is activated, then those neurons that control our respiratory is turned off. So those neurons are not sensing the increased CO2 in the bloodstream, the decreased oxygen in the blood. Then usually we will start to breathe by that time. But because of the opioid receptor is activated, those neurons cannot work anymore. So that's why naloxone is a unlock, so that it can reverse this effect, so that the patients, whoever undergone overdose, then they can start to breathe again. So proper use of these drugs is really important, and then this brings to the question for the recovery of the opioid use disorder patients. If they have access to those medication-assisted therapy, then it will be really, really greatly helpful for them to go through the recovery phase more easier than be on themselves.
So the drugs like heroin or fentanyl are like a sledgehammer that hit those receptors, right?
Yeah.
And those are called full agonists. And then the partial agonists are the ones we treat people with to keep them steady, in a steady state, without being stoned.
Right.
for lack of a better term. And so the partial agonists keep them at a steady state, like methadone and Suboxone, and they can function in society and receive counseling and stuff. And naloxone is the drug that blocks completely the effects of either of those, so that Lieutenant Mayer, when he tries to save someone's life and he injects them, or they sniff something that's an opioid antagonist, what happens? So an opioid antagonist is what saves someone's life when they are dying from an overdose. So they will use the nasal spray, right? And
Yes, sir.
and what happens when you shoot that nasal spray, naloxone, into somebody who could die if you don't do it?
Oh, they're not happy when they wake up.
No,
Yeah,
and it doesn't take long, does
No,
it?
it's a wonderful tool. It is. And we use it.
Explain that. Explain the whole naloxone thing. You're on a call. Somebody says, "My brother's not moving. Help!" And what happens next?
Well, the first thing they train us, they give us a little quick course in what to look for to know that it's an opiate-related situation versus just a heart attack or another kind of a medical deal. Although I will add, there's nothing negative medically that would happen if we administered it to somebody that wasn't in an opiate situation. So that's a good thing. But regardless, when we show up on scene, a lot of these incidents take place in places that we're familiar with individuals we're maybe familiar with. There's some pretty good indicators that it's going to be a drug-related incident. When you get on scene, of the age of the person, a lot of times, you get your 20, 30, late teens even. But there may be paraphernalia laying around, the state of the house and the people. A lot of times folks will even come right out and say, look, they went in the bathroom, they came out and they fell down. And that's a pretty good indicator. And we all carry Narcan, is what we call it, Naxalone, on our person. I have mine on my vest. But it's just a nasal spray. We'll give a pump in each nasal. And really, pretty dramatically. Again, prior to that dispersion, though, we do look for signs that they're in distress as far as no active breathing. There'll be blue lips, discoloration in the face, lack of a pulse, things that pretty much tell us that this person's in bad shape. And as the first responders, we generally can beat the medics there, and we'll administer that Narcan, and the medics will come in and pick it up from there.
Thank you. What do you see? Let's stay with Lieutenant Mayor. When you look out at Douglas County and are concerned about the drug problem here, what do you see? Do you see mostly one drug over another? Does it seem like a massive problem? Just would love your overview from the position of law enforcement.
Sure.
What are the most serious problems? What keeps you up at night is probably
Well, what keeps me up at night is I have an 8-year-old little girl.
All right.
Growing up in this world, and I can't imagine the amount of things that fentanyl is inserted into or mixed with nowadays. Being a kid in America and just experimenting, and I know DECA talked about their objective is to steer kids completely away from even going down that road. But simple experimentation can result in a death nowadays. And while my daughter's a handful of years removed from being at that age already, it's terrifying. In my communications with individuals in the community who are engaged in narcotic use and the lifestyle, they were talking about how dealers are even putting fentanyl with the meth now. And from a business standpoint, what a great business model, because the opiate drug is going to build this physiological craving as well as the psychological craving. And so a person's going to be using meth, and they're not only going to experience that urge the next day when it wears off to go get more meth, but they're going to develop these physiological symptoms that, what has been described to me as basically feeling like you're going to die. It's the flu on 100. And so it drives them back. I need more, I need more, I need more. And so you end up with this mental and physical compulsion and need to get more drugs.
Because the body starts to tolerate.
Correct.
it, and you don't get the same effect.
Right.
More to do the same thing.
Right.
With alcohol too.
Correct, yes, yeah, the tolerance level increases, and again, as the individuals today, the doctors have spoken about, and David at the end of the table, I mean, the key identifier to me, and it's interesting, and I hate that this happens, but you identify an individual in the community that you maybe have a run-in with, and you get these suspicions that they're involved pretty heavily, and then you just watch their trajectory. Is, the house gets taken over by others, and then there's frequent traffic, and then they get evicted, and then they're living in their car, and then they're living in the timber, and then and you can just see the drugs take over. And, again, the hallmark of addiction is, despite all these negative things that are happening in the person's life, the one thing on their mind every day when they get up and about is, man, I got to get more. I got to get more. And it's such a convoluted, every story is unique. But yeah, the fentanyl and the methamphetamine, I'm sorry, I kind of got off.
No, you're fine. Absolutely
Huge,
fine.
huge issue in the community. Kansas City and Topeka on both sides of us are major hubs for that distribution, and it's just a stone's throw away for people to get whatever they need.
I think it might be it might be helpful for people to understand tolerance involves the necessity to take more and more to get the effect. So the more you use, the more you need. So the graph goes like this, but guess what? That the graph doesn't change for what it takes to kill you. So that stays the same. So you can't get high, so you take more. You can't get high, so you take more. You can't get high, and all of a sudden you can't get high, so you take just enough to get you high, but that's also enough to kill you, and that's how people die.
Correct, yes. I will say that the Naxalone programs have been wonderful.
Yeah.
I mean, statistically speaking, in about 21 to 22, there was a huge, almost 4 times jump in our overdose-related deaths in Douglas County from fentanyl, heroin, et cetera.
So here's a question I don't have the answer to. Is naloxone free yet here? Does anyone know?
Yes.
Okay,
naloxone is free.
please jump in, Chrissy.
You
What
can
tell?
go to the DECA website and you can request it to have it shipped directly to your home, or you can go over to the transit center located on Bob Billings and you can get it out of a vending machine. All you need to do is enter your zip code and it will dispense free product to you.
So if you have anyone you love, or even yourself, who is taking an opioid for any reason, pain or whatever, and you need more and more, it's not a bad idea to have this handy.
We do have one other vending location at the DECA office located on East 23rd Street as well.
Thank you for that. David, here's a question for you. Your facility, this is an opportunity for you to talk more about it. We have a lot of people in town who are uninsured, and people who can't get in places because they don't have the resources. Talk about your place and how people will get in if they aren't fortunate enough to have the best insurance in the world, or a sugar daddy mama, or something like that.
So our focus actually is going to be more on the insured private pay sector. It's an underserved sector. We have First Step House. That's a facility for women that takes uninsured. We have Valley Hope that also takes the uninsured. What we plan to do, since we're not going to use grant money, because we are a for-profit center, is to try and provide scholarships so that we can get patients into our facility that want recovery. And then also, I mean, the goal of this, the inspiration of this whole thing came from me noticing what's going on in the community. I own a business down on Massachusetts Street. During the pandemic, I got to see a lot of people walking up and down the street and have some interactions. And, this growing concern just, drove me to this project. And what I would like to see, and as I talk about community, is after this trying to get involved in possibly doing a inpatient recovery program that could somehow be connected to Lawrence Community Shelter. I think that isolation is something that patients really desperately need when they're going through this, and we're talking about the phenomenon of craving and how that's connected to the brain and neuroscience, and especially with opioids, that is a strong thing. to be able to overcome. And I think that isolation and that safety really kind of helps, build a good foundation for the patients and gives them ultimately a better chance at success. So again, we'll start out with, insurance, private pay. I think we've also investigated and working with military, VA. We'll do a scholarship program, and then we'll see where it kind of leads to after that.
Thank you very much. So 3 of the questions have to do with how community members can get involved. One of them specifically asks about an overdose review board, which may or may not be staffed by volunteers as well as the public. So, Chrissy, you're sitting at the edge of your chair.
On this one.
Go for it.
I actually just met with Midwest HIDA on Monday to talk about an overdose fatality review board, because as the Sheriff's Department talked about, they can see a trajectory of how this happens. And so how do we intervene early, and what are our opportunities to intervene to prevent those deaths? And so we'll start looking at options for starting to convene an overdose fatality review board, just to help prevent some of those things and see where law enforcement can intervene, where hospital can intervene, where community health center, where treatment center, where all these folks can intervene, because when you see overdose deaths, you see a clear trajectory of how that happens, and there are options to prevent those deaths.
Other thoughts about that, how the community can get involved? You actually talked, Lieutenant Mayor, about the Citizens Academy.
Yes. Excuse me. Yes, the Sheriff's Office does have a Citizens Academy. One of the things, and this is a personal position of mine, but I do believe in community engagement, and everybody in the community is encouraged and able to apply and attend if they would like. We run it about once a year. There is a current Citizens Academy going through right now, but with that being said, what I would like to see as well is the destigmatization of basically, we're not there to take people to jail. When somebody's dying on the living room floor, my focus and my intention is to revive that person and to save that person with the use of the tools that have been provided. And, ideally, and, the district attorney's office has done a wonderful job with their alternatives with the drug courts. There's a lot of good folks working in those programs trying to destigmatize addiction. And, if we can change the narrative that when the police show up, man, we're not there to find your needle and write you up and charge you criminally for that. What we'd like to do is plug you into resources in the community. And I think the more awareness on a community level, even from folks who aren't involved in that, to understand that, hey, if you've got a neighbor and you're seeing these things, a lot of times, maybe if you're not comfortable talking to them, one of us can come talk to them and say, hey, look, here's some outreach you can have, if they'll answer the door for us. But, a representative from Burt Nash, the crisis response team, there's so many resources in the community. If we could just help people understand, like, our objective is to get you the help you need. If we can plug you into these resources, if we can give you the tools to rebuild the life you want, that's going to be a win for everybody involved.
Thank you very much. One of the people, by the way, who asked how they could volunteer, shared that they had I guess it's an adult child who died from an overdose, and so they feel a deep commitment. Dr. Wang, we have the time, would you just talk a little bit about how you study animals to learn about addiction?
So,
Just what's it like? What do you do? You
So-
give them a joint, or?
so there are several there are several models for animal studies in addiction. So the easiest one is that you just inject the animals with the drugs that can get addicted to. But we have another model where we train the animals to self-administer drugs by themselves. So over different period of time, for example, over 10 days or 20 days, this animal become addicted to these drugs. And then if you don't give them drug for a certain day, and then you put them back into the chamber where they self-administer the drug, then they will went crazy to do the behavior that previously associated with the drug taking. Then this is how we measure their drug craving or their drug relapsing behavior. which is similar in human, where usually they take drug at a certain environment. That this is why David mentioned that isolation. I more think about it, insulation, or protected that person from the environment where they used to take those drugs. That is helpful, but when you expose them to the drug, those drug-associated memory is so strong. Either those memory creates high or pleasure, or those memories that memories about using this drug to ease their pain or ease their sorrows, ease their stress. So either drug, either with associated with pleasure or alleviation of the pain, would promote them to seek for the drug again. So that's the model that we use in our lab.
Thank you. I will offer a drug study because it's my favorite. If you can't take your phone out now, but when you get home, you can take out your phone and Google Rat Park. Rat Park is one of the most famous animal studies ever done on addiction. And what they did was they took rats and they put them in one of two boxes. In one box, it was very plain, dark, boring. And in the other box, they had a playground with wheels and all kinds of exciting rat stuff. And they provided each set of rats in their boxes cocaine. And what do you think they found? When rats are put in environments that are unkind and dark and dreary, they are much more likely to tap on the bar to get drugs. When you give people resources, when you give rats resources, they are not nearly as interested in engaging in drug use. Which leads me to the questions that we haven't gotten to on the blue cards, which is, what more can we do in our community to make sobriety more appealing, to make it, what resources are possible that we don't have yet, that people can access even if they don't have the resources to pay for them? You're smiling. Do you have a thought?
It's such a complex question.
Oh, yeah.
Actually, it sounds so benign on the surface, but we were kind of chatting before the meeting, a handful of us, and again, there's so many layers to this. I think so many of these folks that we see are experiencing trauma that they bring with them, and as you described the rat study, that was one of the things I was thinking about. Is I wonder what would happen if those rats had actually undergone trauma before being placed on the Ferris wheel, because so many times we see these adults who are stuck in these prepubescent or preteen histories, and they use the drugs as masking mechanisms and as coping mechanisms. As they get older, the wounds never heal, and then you've got people who use drugs for survival. Can you blame the gal on the streets who uses meth to stay awake at night for fear that she's going to be, or even the male, sexually assaulted if they fall asleep or their stuff's gone, or it's community. I think, and that's such an easy canned answer, but I think Lawrence and Douglas County are doing the things. We're starting to do the things. First and foremost, us talking about it tonight, getting it in the open, recognizing again that, man, addiction is not a moral failing. You're not a bad person. You're somebody that fell into a bad situation, and man, here's the keys. Let's figure out how to unlock the doors to get better, right? And the community resources are there. So I think we're making the same, or going in a positive direction.
Related to recovery and resources and even trauma, as you bring up, Lieutenant Mayor. Dr. Dodson, we haven't talked about dual diagnosis. Can you talk a little bit about the very common and very unfortunate process of having a so-called dual diagnosis or comorbidity?
It's very common in folks who struggle with addiction, and it's almost like the chicken or the egg. They may have either a depressive disorder or an anxiety disorder that the addiction may complicate or vice versa. In other words, which one started which? Did they start off with anxiety or depression and then develop an addiction to self-treat? Or did they have, maybe due to their genetics, start out with an addiction and then, as a result of all the consequences and the negative consequences, develop anxiety as well as depression? We treat them both. We treat them both.
Somebody asked a question that's not directly about addiction, but it's relevant to treatment, Dr. Dodson, and it might be an appropriate one for you. The development of, in the book, in one of the chapters, it says that Haldol, for the treatment of schizophrenia, was largely responsible for the closing of most mental health settings. I didn't use the word they used. Do you agree, and do you think that we can still do without mental health centers that were like in the olden days where there were many of them and they were state-run and you could get into them even with no resources? Do you think it's even feasible to bring back services that the state runs for the marginalized people? It was a tough question.
Sure, I fully understand
I'm trying to honor the fact that, somebody submitted a card but I don't know if that's one that you can answer. I'm struggling with it myself. I think it would be yes.
Rephrase like.
Well, I'll read it literally. The author states in his chapter that the development of Haldol for the treatment of schizophrenia was largely responsible for the closing of, they called them then, insane asylums. Okay. Do you think or agree that we can still do without those environments? It seems many who are on medications for mental health problems have need settings because they don't take their medication. Anything about that would probably be helpful. I'm trying to get to all the cards.
I think with a lot of the state hospitals, because you hang around the rooms and you have people that have been in the program for a while, that's where everybody used to go. And that wasn't a choice. They were like just put there. And I think that's a lot of the fears with those things. And I think really what he talks about in the book, he talked about this area in Kentucky that through ordinances, through the drug court, being able to intervene in a way if a person was going to cause themselves harm or somebody else, to be able to avoid a catastrophe from happening or a potential, death by overdose would be to have the courts strongly suggest that they go into a center to get help. I mean, our center, we're planning on working with the courts and accepting people through the court system, so taking court vouchers and doing that. So it's like if the courts can step in and identify that they are at risk of hurting themselves and other people and direct them in ways that they used to send them to the state hospitals, that would be, an effective way to help people. Hopefully that hits at least part of that question. That's kind of
I think we're doing the
a
best
twister.
we can with that one.
Yeah.
Here is I'll just read it. As an addict in recovery, I'm the only person I know who is open and honest about my journey. I've shared my testimony when asked, but being one of the few who is not ashamed or fearful about sharing the story to help others. Should I be the only, I think the question is there a way to share my story openly so that I can humanize addiction? And I think this was so successful, I think I'll talk to Kathleen about perhaps the need to do something as follow-up, maybe that would give people an opportunity to talk about their experiences in some kind of an organized panel-type fashion, and we'll see if that's a possibility. So the person who submitted this, we have only 5 minutes. So what I'd love to do, I'll take these blue cards. The blue cards, the ones that are left, really we're asking about what more we can do as a community. So this is an opportunity for all 5 of you, quickly, with 45 seconds each. If you can think of anything that you'd like to see us do as a community, I think that'd be a great way to wrap up. Starting with anyone, just anything we can do as a community.
I can start. We do have a local community coalition called Engage Douglas County that does focus on substance misuse and suicide prevention, mental health promotion as well. So you can go to engagedouglascounty.org to learn more about that. Also focus on, if you know someone who uses drugs, encourage them to, 1, never use alone, and 2, always have naloxone handy. Naloxone is no good on yourself. You can't use it on yourself if you're unconscious. And again, naloxone will only enable breathing, so never use alone and have naloxone.
That was so efficient. Very nice job. Can any of you do the same?
I can follow up with that. It's
Thank you.
just, I think earlier last year, Kansas State legalized the testing strip for fentanyl. Where you're taking the drugs, you can always test whether fentanyl is involved. So I think that's really helpful to prevent the overdose, because most of the overdose is associated with fentanyl. The second thing I wanted to say is that put a lot more awareness to the larger community, is that be cautious about whatever we are taking. Be cautious about educating our young child and young adolescents to be responsible for their behavior, and to watch out for those wrong information flying out to the market, like THC is safe or CBD is safe. There's no supporting science about any of those. So just to be more careful about educating the next generation.
Yeah, it's really interesting hearing people say that marijuana or cannabis is safe because it's natural.
It's surprising that CBD, if it's derived from marijuana, then it's scheduled 1 substance, but if it's synthesis, it's not. And people always have the wrong impression, if it's naturally derived, then it is legal, it is using without problem, but it's not. And I'm surprised to see there's a sign around our neighborhood says legal THC, legal CBD, free testing. Just come here. I'm like, what?
Very interesting. Well, you're sitting next to the guy who's going to look into that. Lieutenant, did you have some thoughts about what we can do as a community?
I was going to actually defer to the doctor, but I'll go ahead and jump in since he called on me. First and foremost, my cell phone number is 785-813-5456. If you or anybody you know is thinking about putting that needle in their arm or going out and doing something silly, call me. I'll tell everybody. I'll go have a cup of coffee. We'll talk. We'll figure it out. If I can't help you, if I don't answer the phone, I'll plug you into somebody who will help you. Just leave me a message and say, we need to talk. This is important. Call me back. With that note, again, just community awareness, man. Reach out, love the people in your life. Loneliness, fear, anxiety feels the same whether you're on drugs or you're not. I think a lot of times we just forget to tell folks how much they mean to us and that we appreciate them being in our life, and it goes a long way.
Thank you. 2 more. Any thoughts about what we can do?
I think for me,
Talk into the microphone. You have a soft voice.
two ends of the spectrum. One is a little bit like what my fellow panelists have talked about. If you know anybody who's struggling with this, please be there. They need a natural support. And just know that it's going to be difficult. You will and they will have their ups and downs, but please continue to be there throughout their journey. And then the second one is we still have a national shortage of mental health providers. And so if anyone has an inkling and wants to be trained as a counselor or anything related to addictions, please do it, because the services are needed.
And you can go in entry level at Burt Nash. You can start
Correct.
with very little experience and get training.
And people are willing to be trained, are willing to do the training.
David.
So I was kind of thinking of this earlier because, being familiar with addiction, I mean, one of the heartbreaking truths of this whole thing, you cannot force somebody to want recovery. You just can't. I mean, that is, I've had tons of friends that I wish I could have like touched them on the forehead and it would have been the answer. And like I could just give them the knowledge. So, you know, I think a lot of it is just, you know, again, having that community, not giving them that opportunity to isolate, to withdraw. I think there's so many little things that are done that, you know, just can pull people back from the edge when they're in that dark place. And, you know, again, for me, I isolated from everything for a long time, and that just seems to be a characteristic pattern. So if you know somebody, if you see somebody that's kind of doing that or telling like some fibs to kind of con money, I mean, addicts can be very manipulative. And if you start seeing just some kind of weird behavior, things like that, seeing somebody isolate, those are good indicators to kind of step in and try and like seek help. I think the courts can be beneficial. Again, not criminalizing the addicts, but directing them to a program and have the consequences of, you know, jail there to be a strong motivator to, you know, to get them there. People can get it. It doesn't have to be that like burning bush moment when they walk into a facility. So they can get it, but you know, it's also having facilities that are there, having lots of choices, having places that they could go to. So we need more of them. We also need more people to staff them. I'll agree with that as well, because I'm getting prepared to do that myself. So anyway, that's all I got. Thanks.
All right, and I do have good news about resources that some of you may or may not know about. The library has been generous for almost 6 years at letting us do Smart Recovery meetings. Smart Recovery is an international organization that specializes in helping people with addictions for free. And it's here in the library, and we've met every Wednesday. For a while, we had 7 meetings a week. That was before COVID. Anyone who wants to volunteer can reach out. I would start by looking it up in the library index and finding that you can. I would start by attending a meeting and saying, I just want to help, every Wednesday from 5 to 6:30. Furthermore, Matt, raise your hand. Matt is he's among the hubs who the rest of us spin around, because he does a lot to make this all happen. There's also a program that the county runs. It's the peer support program. And if you're in recovery for any mental health problem, it goes even beyond volunteering. You can actually get paid to be part of a community effort to help people with all kinds of mental health problems. And the library also generously supports the training by offering space every other Wednesday, where we train the peers. So there are places to go to volunteer, even places to get paid if you are interested in an 18-hour-a-week job, and that's, again, through the county. I would like to thank all of you so much for joining us tonight. I thought this was absolutely a wonderful opportunity for us to get together as a community and think about these issues. Thank you to our partners, Lawrence Public Library, of course, and then Burt Nash Community Mental Health Center, Dr. Dodson, DECA. Thank you very much, Chrissy Mayer. University of Kansas Department of Pharmacology and Toxicology. Thank you, Dr. Wang. And Douglas County Sheriff's Office. Thank you, Lieutenant Mayor. And Avalon Wellness and Recovery Center. Heartland Community Health and Lawrence Cares. Are you guys in the back? Are there people who, thank you for all you do. And is the table still set up in the back? If people wanted to, if you wanted to stop by the back, you're welcome to. Let's see. Look for a survey and a list of recommended reading in your email within the next few days. We look forward to continuing this conversation. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you.